Richard Powers has written many novels throughout his career, one of which is called Orfeo. Orfeo was written in 2014 about a lonely man named Peter Els. Peter has a goal of combining his two passions, music and science. Peter's at-home biology lab raises questions that concern the authorities. When his house is eventually invaded, Peter becomes a fugitive. So what do you think Peter Els' intentions were with his at-home biology lab?
He was messing around with DNAs. He didn't mean to attack anyone or anything.
So you don't think the police should have came in and investigated his house?
I mean, I understand why they came and investigated, but they should have investigated more before they charged him being a bioterrorist.
So you don't think he was planning a bioterrorist attack?
He was not.
What do you think he was doing with it?
He was having fun at home with his lab. I feel like they can give him a warning instead of charging him for being criminal, because whatever he's doing might be dangerous for other people, but he doesn't know that.
So overall, you think his intentions were to help people,
I
or
don't-
just to fulfill his?
just for fun. He didn't help anyone or he didn't harm anyone. Just for him.
Peter's story raises the question, should everyone have access to the materials and be able to have an at-home biolab? Do you know what biohacking and bioterrorism is?
Yep.
Okay, so how would you feel if you knew your neighbor had a biohacking lab at home?
I wouldn't. I mean, if he's not doing anything potentially dangerous, I don't see why not.
Okay, so what would you do if they were planning a bioterrorism attack on the country?
Well, I would probably report it to someone, but because you can't identify intent, so there's actually like no proof that they're biohacking or bioterrorism. So we can't really do anything until an investigation happens.
So would you have a biohacking lab at home?
Yeah, sure, why not?
So what would you do with it?
I tried to maybe help genetically modify, foods or something to make them resistant to pesticides or something, so that people, or like, the brown rice where you have, it's where you can modify rice to give more proteins or something that third world countries need. So.
And do you think people should be allowed to have at-home personal biolabs?
Yeah, if they're not using like any potentially dangerous pathogen or bacteria or virus or anything like that. Just like the regular, normal, harmless bacteria.
Know what biohacking and bioterrorism is?
Yes.
Okay, so how would you feel if you knew that your neighbor had a biohacking lab at home?
I would be terrified.
So, what would you do if you knew that they were planning a bioterrorism attack on the country?
I think I would report it. I think the only thing is just kind of where do you report it to? Because the police, they could do something, but it's just hard to see that because that's not like a crime. Like, it's not like robbery or like anybody's hurt or something. It's just like, yeah, a planning attack. So, yeah.
And so, would you have a biohacking lab at home?
No. I wouldn't.
Why?
Because I would rather leave it up to the professionals. Because you just never know for sure. Even if I have like a science degree, I wouldn't know, so I don't have some certification and anything like that.
Do you know what biohacking and bioterrorism are?
Yes.
How would you feel if you knew your neighbor had a biohacking lab?
I wouldn't mind it as long as not causing any harm to me.
Would you have a biohacking lab at home?
I think I would.
Why? What would you do with it?
I would want to create something that would help us with our memory. So like when we have like exams, somehow would help us for at least that moment to remember everything we've studied.
Do you think people should be allowed to have personal at-home biolabs?
Yes, but with some regulations.
The real problem with at-home labs is whether it is scientific biological research or not at all. at-home labs have differing biosafety levels. Biosafety level 1 is for the work with agents that are not known to cause disease in healthy adult humans. Some examples of these agents at this level include non-pathogenic and non-infectious bacteria and viruses. Biosafety level 4 is the most secure level and is for the work with exotic and dangerous pathogens for which there is no cure or vaccine available. Some examples include Ebola and other hemorrhagic fevers.
Okay, so do you think that anyone should be able to have access to materials and or chemicals to use in at-home labs?
I would say it is necessary to restrict certain materials.
Like what?
For instance, Ebola.
Okay, so harmful.
Yeah, harmful. Yeah, very harmful because most people, I would say amateur scientists or professional, don't have the training to work with those sorts of things.
Okay, so what consequences do you think could come of giving access to these types of materials to everybody?
What consequences?
Mm-hmm.
Would be just, I think, as you alluded to earlier, there's possibility for anything to happen, bioterrorism or even the opposite, the very converse, something really good could happen. But nonetheless, I think restrictions are probably pretty important.
So overall, you think at-home labs should be left to the professionals and?
No. I think under certain circumstances, because great things can happen at amateur labs at the home. People can make great discoveries, but I would say that people that are doing research on very hazardous organisms, substances, that stuff should be done in a controlled environment.
Okay, so you're saying allow the not harmful materials, but restrict it and regulate it.
Yeah. And most of those things are already restricted. And so, for instance, you can't necessarily go and purchase the Ebola virus anywhere, but you have to go to a level 5 containment in certain areas.
And so do people have to have license to purchase Ebola or purchase harmful bacteria?
Yeah. We have to go through certain restricted materials for the chemistry department. You have to file the appropriate paperwork, and I think you're audited on occasion.
Okay. Yeah. And so do you think people should be able to have at-home biology labs?
That is dependent on what kind of biology lab.
So, do you think that anyone should have access to materials like bacteria to use for at-home biology labs?
No.
What would you restrict? Or would you restrict anything or all of it?
Well, I am not a bacteriologist or really very educated in bioterrorism sort of things and what's more dangerous and what's not. But I do think that for people to get their hands on potentially dangerous organisms, they should have some sort of channels to go through. And I'm taking an ethics class right now, a bioethics class, and we talked about an incident that happened here in Oregon, and it was the largest bioterrorism attack in the United States until the whole anthrax thing happened. And this is just with salmonella, and it was a cult, and they were able to gain access to the salmonella and get people sick. And there's a lot more to it than that, but I know I only have a couple minutes. But I don't think that people like that, like everyday religious cult members, should have access to salmonella strains.
So do you think they should leave it up to the professionals, like the people with the degrees, in order to use these biolabs? And
I think that having a biolab in general at your home, if you're doing for your own thing, is really cool. Like, I'd love to have one. But when you're dealing with things that are possibly dangerous, whether it's microorganisms or permit, or I don't know.
So if you could do anything with an at-home biolab, what would you do with it?
It would probably be mostly live animals. I don't know if you'd call it a lab and more of a zoo. But there would be, I don't know, I would look into the kind of equipment that I could get for cheap and see what I could do with it.
Published by Nature, it is written that the professional scientific community should welcome amateur scientists with at-home biology labs. At-home experiments became more known in 2008 when a group of scientists met in a restaurant in Cambridge to share their findings with their at-home labs. At this time, the media was covering every story about the findings of the DIY biolabs, but there were also growing concerns for the possibility of a bioterrorist attack. Quote, as for that imagined bioterrorist, U.S. experts at the FBI Weapons of Mass Destruction Directorate have investigated and found no sign of a biohacker who intends harm. This leads to the explanation that DIY biology labs are safe and it is unlikely that any harm could come from experimenting with one.
Would you have a biohacking lab at home?
Hell yeah.
Why?
Because it would be freaking cool to have a biohacking lab in my basement.
So what would you do with it?
I would be a bioterrorist.
That's all you would do with it?
That's all I would do with it.
Okay.
Would you have a biohacking lab at home?
Yes, I think I would.
Why?
Because I feel that everyone should have the right to experiment with whatever they want as long as it's safe and regulated.
What would you do with it?
With my at-home biohacking lab, I would try to create a gene that would make puppies live forever.
How would you feel if you knew your neighbor had a biohacking lab?
If I knew my neighbor well enough and I knew they meant no harm to civilization, then I wouldn't consider that as a threat. But if I didn't know my neighbor or if I knew there was some kind of threat, I guess I would be concerned, and I guess I would have to. I would feel like I have the obligation to tell someone.
Third question. Would you have a biohacking lab at home? If so, why? And what would you do with it?
I guess it would be awesome to have a at-home lab, but a biohacking lab, that might be too extreme. I guess that should be left up to the professionals.
Final question. Do you think people should be allowed to have a personal at-home labs?
I mean, if it's just for pastime or hobby, why not? But I mean, if it meant some kind of threat to civilization, I guess not. I guess there should be some regulation from the government to be regulating these kind of labs, especially for those who mean threat.